Q&A. Hi, I'm Marie Sanowick. I work in the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 8. I'm in the Pollution Prevention and Toxics Unit. 2 years ago, I embarked on a 2-year master's degree program in biomimicry and graduated in April of this year to become a certified biomimicry professional. So my job within EPA is to provide assistance to industries, states, and to federal agencies in developing and implementing sustainability plans. And biomimicry is certainly a very viable tool to help implement sustainability plans. So what I want to do today is to give you an overview of biomimicry and then talk about some applications that we've already used in the region. So I'll begin by just reminding all of us that we are nature. And as a species, we have forgotten that over the past 100 years through our history of the Industrial Revolution. And we can protect the environment more effectively when we actually look to our natural world for solutions to our environmental impacts. And the science of biomimicry can help us do that. So biomimicry is the conscious emulation of nature's genius. And conscious implies that we intentionally ask nature for advice. Emulation means that we are not directly copying nature, but rather abstracting deep design principles from the strategies found in the natural world and then applying those strategies to help solve our challenges. And nature's genius recognizes the inspiration we can gain from 3.8 billion years of research and development currently represented by the 30 to 100 million species living on this planet. Currently, 99.9% of all species that have ever lived on the planet Earth are extinct. So the 0.1% that are left really represent the true champion adapters and survivors, and they could teach us a lot of information about how they've been able to do that. So as the industrial age moves into the biological age, this emerging science can help us develop nature-based approaches to satisfy our human needs and wants. So biomimicry gets design ideas from nature. It's a new science that studies nature's models and then imitates or takes inspiration from these designs and processes to solve human problems. Biomimicry is a way to design with nature, a way to test the rightness of our innovations. That is, if no one else is doing it, should we? I had an interesting experience when I was coming home on the bus the day that the Gulf oil spill occurred. And I was thinking, oh, this is our opportunity. Let me get all my biomimicry cohorts who I graduated with to get together. Maybe we could form a blog and offer some biomimicry solutions to the oil spill. But then it dawned on me, there are no organisms on the planet who drill 5,000 feet into the surface of the Earth. So again, if no other organism on Earth is doing something, should we do it as well?
Hey, Marie, are you still out there? I think we've lost our connection for some reason. Hang tight.
Hello?
Okay, Marie, we hear you now. We lost you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Something happened to my computer. So,
Oh,
okay, let's continue. you.
I'm glad nothing happened to you. I thought maybe
okay.
I don't know what happened. Okay, welcome back.
Okay, yes. So nature as a mentor suggests that we can learn from her and not extract from her. So Design for Nature sets out from the get-go to get it right. It's a new way to value the natural world. Biomimicry is another tool to use when we're thinking about the whole system. And the system we really are able to manage is our human systems. Can we model them after the natural ones that we steward? Humans can mimic the forms in nature, the processes in nature, or we can mimic how the ecosystem performs functions that we need to perform to do our jobs. For example, in building a sustainable community, we need to mimic the forms, processes, and ecosystems found in our natural community. We can ask the question, what does this ecosystem want to do? It takes less energy and effort to work within the natural conditions than to try to fight against them. And biomimicry reminds us that there are operating conditions on the planet Earth that we must design for. And they are, first, that the Earth is a water-based planet, and all chemistry done in nature uses water as the solvent. The second operating condition is that Earth is subject to limits and boundaries. We found this out when the humans tried to duplicate nature with construction of the Biosphere 2 in Arizona and failed. We were unable to work within the limits and boundaries of a self-created ecosystem. And third, the Earth is in a state of dynamic non-equilibrium. Just like trees need to adapt to ever-changing climate conditions, we need to develop human systems that will adapt as conditions change. This picture on the left demonstrates the amount of water on the planet. The blue ball is all the water on the planet, all the fresh water, all the ocean water, all the clouds and snowpack. The picture on the right shows all the atmosphere on our planet. We have very definite limits and boundaries that we must also recognize and work within. So let's look at a few examples of how biomimicry has solved some of humans' challenges. Imagine if CO2 was a resource. That's exactly how life on Earth has evolved to act. Every plant uses CO2 as its building block. Photosynthesis takes water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight to make sugars, leaves, and wood. What if our building materials could use carbon dioxide as a fundamental part of their construction? A company called Calera has looked at the coral reefs for inspiration on how to handle CO2. Cement is one of the most widely used materials since the construction of Rome, yet it requires heating limestone to over 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. This process of heating today uses fossil fuels, and as a result, the production of 1 ton of cement releases at least 1 ton of CO2 that used to be locked up in the oil under the earth. Calera took a bio-inspired approach, following the concepts of how biological organisms like coral reefs turn CO2 and ions like calcium and magnesium into calcium carbonate. When CO2 is mixed with water, it turns into carbonic acid. This carbonic acid is common throughout nature. You even have it pumping in your own bloodstream. It's quite useful. One of the useful things it can do is when carbonic acid is in the presence of metal ions like calcium or magnesium, it forms calcium or magnesium carbonates, the very material that forms bones, shells, and coral reefs. So by creating calcium carbonate through this method, rather than heating limestone, Calera estimates that for every ton of CO2, every ton of cement produced, half a ton of CO2 is actually sequestered. Another example is blue mussels. They live in turbulent near-shore waters where they feed on suspended plankton. To effectively catch and consume these plankton, the mussels themselves need to gain a firm grip on whatever rock or solid surface that they can. Inspired by this tenacity, Dr. Lee, who's the Associate Professor of the Department of Wood and Science Engineering at Oregon State University, and his group were granted a patent for their development of a soy-based wood adhesive consisting of soy proteins decorated with a structure that mimics the muscle's adhesive proteins. In 2006, the Columbia Forest Products, which is North America's largest manufacturer of hardwood, plywood, and hardwood veneers, switched from using formaldehyde-based wood adhesives to Lee's patented soy-based adhesive in all its plywood plants. The company estimated that they eliminated the use of 47 million pounds of the conventional formaldehyde-based adhesives at each of its plants and reduced emissions of hazardous pollutants by 50 to 90%. What does nature know about design? Researchers at Interface, a Georgia-based company that's known for its commitment to zero waste, found out what nature knows about design when they took a walk in the woods that inspired them to mimic the organized chaos of a blanket of fallen leaves. The result was their entropy line of carpet tiles, and the designer David Oakley reflected that only in our synthetic world do we want perfection. One shade, no blemishes. If we can't match a carpet's color exactly, we call it a defect. Interface sells carpet squares, so when an area is damaged, only those specific squares need to be replaced, not the whole room. Now with the entropy line, the replacement is even easier because you don't have to worry about matching dye lots, and the tiles can be placed on the floor in any direction. The entropy line is varied in color and pattern, yet when they laid out together, they form a cohesive pattern just like the floor of a forest. Not only is replacement easier for the consumer, but there's less waste during production since the entropy line can use multiple dye lots. Considering that Interface is the world's largest commercial carpet manufacturer, this amounts in a significant reduction in waste, especially when this biomimetic product now represents 40% of their carpet sales. Interface didn't just do this in their design, they employed biomimicry principles throughout their entire operation, saving over $372 million in waste cost, diverting over 100 million pounds of materials from the landfill, and reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by more than 30%, and reduce their water intake by up to 75%. Here's another example. Swarms are perfect models for those people who are trying to solve problems dealing with self-organization and decentralization. Also known as swarm logic, animals such as bees, ants, and birds solve problems not by making independent decisions, but by communicating with each other using a simple language that allows them to coordinate, organize, and problem solve without orders from a central command. A company called Regen Energy has developed a device that applies the concept of swarm logic that allows electrical appliances in a building to communicate with each other to minimize how much power the appliances collectively use at any point in time. So instead of using a top-down approach to control appliances, a more decentralized approach to energy management increases efficiency during peak loads of 20 to 30%. How does nature clean? Well, the lotus leaf is one of the cleanest plants in nature, even though it lives in a swamp. The many crevices on the lotus leaf's rough surface, as seen in the picture on the right, trap a maze of air upon which the water droplets float, so that the slightest breeze or tilt of the leaf will cause balls of water to roll cleanly off, taking attached dirt particles with them. So a company called Lotusan has used this in making a paint called Lotusan paint, which mimics the design of painted surfaces, and it cleans buildings naturally during a rainstorm, and has also created a fabric finish that does the same. And my last example is this one, and major discoveries always come with a story. And so this story is this gentleman in the center, Dr. Frank Fish. Well, he was shopping for a gift in an artist store, and explained the sculpture of a humpback whale in the shop looked inaccurate. He said, "Look at that. The sculptor put the bumps on the wrong side of the flipper." And the manager quickly set him straight. She knew the sculpture's work and that the sculptor knew his humpbacks. That's where the bump should be. A quick check, and Frank was convinced that the artist got it right. But if the artist was right, then at least part of the science of fluid dynamics was wrong. How could that be? Often biomimicry begins with a closer look at nature. In this case, Dr. Frank Fish was a man with a problem. He happened to run the Liquid Life Lab at West Chester University and spent his days considering biomechanics and fluid dynamics. And the whale flipper just didn't make any sense to him. It really boggled his mind. Until Frank Fish asked this question. Everyone studying airfoils and hydrofoils knew that the leading edge of these devices had to be smooth and streamlined. They had proved that even insect debris stuck on the leading edge of wind turbine rotors, for example, could damage performance. What were those bumps doing on those flippers? The question is the key to the beginning of biomimicry. It's looking at biology from a functional perspective, a biomimetric perspective. Frank then hooked up with a friend of his who is a consultant with the Navy and who happens to be one of the leading people in fluid dynamics. Together they enlisted the help of 2 Navy engineers to understand better the performance of the ridges on the whale's flipper. This led to the discovery that those flippers actually cut down the drag, and applying that information and that innovation to the edges of wind turbines allowed wind turbines to generate 20% more electricity than a smooth blade. So in biomimicry, it really strives to emulate the general patterns and processes found in nature. And we refer to these principles as life's principles. And I'm going to just give you a short overview of them. So a complete list of life principles articulates not just the principles listed, but also the sub-strategies that life uses to apply these principles. Life creates conditions conducive to life, and how nature does that is through optimizing rather than maximizing, leveraging interdependence between each other and different species, and through benign water-based chemistry. Life also adapts and evolves by being locally attuned and responsive, integrating cyclical processes, and being resilient. In a time of change, one very important principle that we need to pay a special attention to is the principle of resilience. So I'd like to just give you a more detailed overview of that one. So resiliency is the capacity of the system to absorb a disturbance and continuing functioning as essentially the same system. Like this picture shows, here's a forest that was burnt, but because it has resiliency built into the system, it's coming back, it's being restored, it's able to continue functioning as the same system because it has resiliency. In the face of changing climate, changing political attitudes, and changing financial situation, resiliency is a very important principle to pay attention to. Resiliency for social, economic, and ecological systems is related to, first, the magnitude of the shock that a system can absorb and remain in a given state. Secondly, the degree to which the system is capable of self-organization. And 3, the degree to which the system can build capacity for learning and adaptation. In generally, resiliency derives from things that can be restored only slowly, such as reservoirs of soil nutrients, heterogeneity of ecosystems on a landscape, or a variety of genotypes or species. In order for organisms, a community, or any system to be resilient, it must demonstrate all three strategies of under resiliency, and they are diversity, redundancy, and being decentralized and distributed. In nature, organisms must be able to regain function because they cannot predict when a disturbance will occur. And although we can more accurately predict when disturbances can occur, building that resiliency in our systems is something we need to do up front. So let's look at how, for example, some sustainable communities are starting to incorporate these strategies. First of all, one of the strategies is to be diverse. Diversity is the capacity to carry out the same function in many different ways. An example of that many communities are doing is they're starting a local food movement. The ability to get your food from many different sources would help you when a disturbance occurred that maybe would interrupt your food distribution or generation. The second strategy that's needed for resiliency is to be redundant. And this is making sure there are a number of units carrying out vital functions. So something like a city can operate even if one or several of those units are disturbed. And an example of that found in sustainable communities are having multiple transportation options. So if one of your transportation routes is disturbed in some way, you can still get around the community. And the third strategy in becoming a resilient community would be to be decentralized and distributed. So a resilient city spreads its function in ways that if a malfunction occurs somewhere, it does not have a critical impact on the function of the whole system. For example, the community that I live in has two separate water sources that are located in two different ecosystems. We have a high mountain reservoir and we have an eastern plains reservoir, so that if one of our water sources is disturbed in some way, we can still deliver water to the residents of our community and regain the functions through this resilient strategy. So I want you just to take a minute and think about your organization or a project that you're working on and see, is it resilient? Does it contain a diversity of ideas, or do you only want to talk to people who have like thoughts similar to yours? Does it have a diversity of human opportunities so that it includes people from all throughout your community in the project or organization? And does it have a diversity of economic options? Given the economic climate that we're in, that's a lot of different things are happening. Does your organization or project encourage adaptation and learning? Are policies set in stone, or can you adapt and evolve as new information comes in? Do you have resiliency building management that's based on flexibility and learning? So managing for resiliency enhances the likelihood of sustaining development in a changing world where surprise is very likely. The other thing about biomimicry that I find really important is that it encouraged biologists and other scientists and engineers, people who actually build the infrastructure in cities, to collaborate, using nature as model and mentor. So let's look at some examples in our area where biomimicry is being actually used. So one project is the Cuyahoga River Valley, and many of you are familiar with the Cuyahoga River. It's the river that caught on fire in 1969, and it actually prompted the start of the environmental movement and was the catalyst for actually signing the legislation on December 2nd, 1970, to start the EPA. The people who live in the Cuyahoga River Valley, the county commissioners, adopted biomimicry as a way to do business several years ago, and they really want to watch their valley reemerge from this terrible history into the first place to use life's principles to govern their ecosystem. So as a 4-county area, the county commissioners are working through life's principles and developing tools and applications on how they can make their land use policies follow life's principles. And it's interesting to know this is a very developed ecosystem. It started with the beginning of Standard Oil Company about 250 years ago, and there's an incredible amount of infrastructure in this valley. And the people there don't want the valley to return to a pristine state. They want to repurpose their infrastructure so that the basic functions that need to occur in the ecosystem are restored, but then they can use the investment of the infrastructure that they've invested in over the years to accomplish the things that they need to do as humans. One example would be they're developing bike paths and walking paths to connect the people throughout the valley to the Lake Erie. The Cuyahoga River discharges into Lake Erie. But they're also asking the question, what other organisms need to connect, and how can we make sure that migration pathways and flight pathways that existed in the pristine environment before development could also be reinstated. Another example is using nature-based principles as a sustainability tool in protecting the national parks. And the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve in south central Colorado is one of the most biologically and geologically diverse parks in the United States. The park superintendent, Art Hutchinson, and the park's chief of resource management, Fred Bunch, were intrigued by the idea that they could draw upon this biological diversity to solve some of the operational challenges that they were facing. And they agreed to host a team of scientists, engineers, and architects for a week-long workshop at a remote location within the park. Critical information about the organisms that lived in the local ecosystem was provided by the park's biologists. And the Great Sand Dunes challenged the group to discover strategies on two challenges. First, how does nature provide portable hydration? And they wanted to help solve the problem of too many plastic drink bottles in the park without reverting to collect the plastic bottles and recycle them. The second challenge was, how does nature respond to a soil disturbance at the Great Sand Dunes? And they wanted the team to use biomimicry methodology to design a more effective and locally attuned invasive species management strategy to help secure and hold the sand sheet without reverting to herbicides to remove the invasive plant species. And you can access a summary of the report of this workshop at the Pizza Prairie website. EPA is using nature-based principles to reduce chemicals from the toxic release inventory. The Region 8 EPA TRI program worked with the Biomimicry Guild to identify innovations to reduce potentially harmful impacts of these toxic release inventory chemicals. So we chose biphenyl A, which is BPA, was selected as the target chemical based on environmental release quantities reported for TRI for 2008, and it's a chemical of concern for EPA. BPA is used as a color developer in thermal and carbonless paper, and this was chosen as the target application. Many of you are familiar with the information surrounding BPA and plastic, especially plastic water bottles or baby bottles, and this is another place that BPA is used extensively in your cash register receipts. So thermal and carbonless paper consist of a layer of color development chemicals covering the whole surface on the side to be printed. That's why when you leave one of your cash register receipts in the sunlight or the heat, it just turns blank because it activates all of those chemicals. And these chemicals are microencapsulated to prevent reaction until heat or pressure causes the capsules to rupture, allowing the BPA to react and darken the chemical dye on the paper. So experiments have shown that 10 times more BPA can be transferred to wet or greasy skin compared to dry skin, and that this BPA may penetrate to depths where it can no longer be washed off. BPA is an issue because it has been shown to mimic natural estrogens that may impact the endocrine system even at very low dosage. So in working with the Biomimicry Guild, we conducted a shallow dive into nature's color-changing strategies, and we revealed almost 24 natural strategies for color change in organisms that could form an alternative to using the current technology. So while it didn't come up with the answer to removing BPA from these cash register receipts, we did advance the discussion to the next step, which is to challenge a university, research lab, or industry inventors to build upon this first step and develop a prototype based on these biomimicry strategies for further investigation. The U.S. Forest Service is using biomimicry as a sustainability tool, and the USDA Forest Service Western Collective is a partnership between 5 Forest Service regions in the West and 2 Forest Service research stations and EPA Region 8. The Western Collective is using biomimicry language as a way to underscore the connection between the Forest Service employees who manage their resources and the organisms within that resource. So as a first step in introducing biomimicry to Forest Service staff, the Western Collective will use biomimicry terminology in describing the accomplishments of their 2010 accomplishments report. So what can you do? The first thing, the most important thing, is for you to just go outside. Just stop and listen to what nature is telling you. Just take a deep breath and then echo what you hear. And hopefully that will help you quiet your cleverness, because as humans, we feel that we can solve all the problems with our ingenuity. But what it really has done is we have ignored the operating conditions of the planet because we were able to do that. And it's time for us to revert back to the wisdom of the organisms on this planet. And one tool that can help you do that is asknature.org. Imagine nature's most elegant ideas organized by design and engineering function. So you could get on this web page and enter something like filter salt from water and see how mangroves, penguins, or shorebirds desalinate without fossil fuels. Now imagine you could meet the people who have studied these organisms, and together you could create the next great bio-inspired solution. So Ask Nature is a free open source project built by the community and for the community. And the goal of Ask Nature is to connect innovative minds with nature's best ideas, and in the process inspire technologies that create conditions conducive to life. So to accomplish this, Ask Nature is doing something that has never been done before. And it's taking all the scientific literature out there that is organized based on the organism that performs the function and switching that around and organizing the world's biological literature by function. By learning how organisms meet these challenges, we can learn how to solve our own design challenges. So I encourage you to get onto this web page and to just play with it for a while. Okay, now I'm ready for some questions.
Thank you, Marie. A couple of questions. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the solutions that you came up with in your great sand dunes project?
Sure. Like I mentioned, that we had the 2 challenges, and the first one was whenever they do construction on site at the Great Sand Dunes, they need to reseed the area, and the area needs to be reseeded as soon as the construction project is completed, because the contractors, that's part of their contract. And the plant biologist who's responsible for this adopted revegetation plans that are used throughout the National Park Service. And so they have some specially grown grasses that are native to that ecosystem, and they put that grass seed down, and what actually happens is the grass seed has a very narrow root, and it has a very narrow leaf, and so not much of the area of the land is filled through that plant. And in looking to how natives perform different functions in that ecosystem, this group was looking at how the native people had seed banks that they collected and kept stored for the next year. And they thought, well, what we should do is we should have a seed bank ready to distribute these seeds that didn't include just one seed, the grass seed, but included seeds that filled every niche, because that's what nature does. So they identified the different root zones and identified plants that grow and germinate at different times that throughout the year that would fulfill all of those niches. And what they do now is they overseed with grass seed, and then they invite volunteers to come and remove the invasive species by hand to encourage other plants to take up those niches. What they're going to be doing after this biomimicry workshop is to have those volunteers actually go out and collect these specific seeds that would fill all those niches in that disturbed area and reseed with a variety of seeds instead of doing just grass seeds. So that's an example of how that challenge was studied and fulfilled.
Great, thank you. I had one request that you go back to your last slide while we're talking through a few more questions.
Okay.
And I have a question. It was asknature.org, correct? That was the website you referred to?
Yes, it's www.asknature.org.
Okay, great. And another note too, the presentation and the document that Murray was referring to on the Great Sand Dunes and the audio version of the presentation will be on the Peaks to Prairies website, peakstoprairies.org. So I have another question here. I'm just curious, is geothermal energy an example of biomimicry? I'm trying to think of an example of geothermal-like processes in nature, heating and cooling.
Well, I don't know the answer to that specifically. I guess I would encourage you to go to asknature.org and look it up, but we can just kind of think through it. So geothermal energy is the heat that comes out of the earth, and there are organisms who have adapted and used that heat source to live. And the most notable is all the organisms that live in the hot pools up in Yellowstone National Park and places like that. Actually putting a pipe into the ground and piping it into your house is definitely a human innovation. So I don't see that it's a direct connection to biomimicry, although, like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, biomimicry is another tool in the sustainability toolbox, and so it doesn't discount something that's not biomimicry, but whereas geothermal energy certainly is a good sustainability application for energy use, but I don't know of any organism that uses it to heat their home, for example.
Okay, and then another question. As many agencies in the government have been put under, presidential orders to address climate change and sustainability within the agency community, we hear more and more about adaptation and resiliency, and those terms coming to light. Do you think that they're sort of thinking in biomimicry terms without really even realizing that they are? And what is your take on the mitigation aspect of climate change versus the adaptation that we're hearing more and more about?
Okay, a couple things. One, I just wanted to remind everybody that biomimicry isn't new. It's something that Native people used on a very regular basis, and one of the key components of the people, the first people, or the Native Americans, was that their culture, they believed that they were part of nature, and so they looked to organisms in nature many times to solve problems. A good example of that is if you look at the adobe homes that are built in the Southwest by Native people, adobe bricks are about 12 inches deep. And when you look at the organisms that burrow underground in that same ecosystem, they're about 12 inches underground. So native people have been using this for a long time. As we went through the Industrial Revolution, we forgot about accessing nature. And now we have a lot more technology where we can actually look at how organisms perform on a cellular level that will really help us apply more of these ideas to the designs that we want to make. In the area of climate change, when we're talking about climate change mitigation, it's mitigating effects of not designing based on the operating conditions of the Earth. We've taken, energy that's been stored underground for millions of years and put it into the environment, and that's what's causing some of the climate change problems that we have. As far as adaptation, I think that we can use biomimicry quite a lot in looking at adaptation strategies. And right now we're talking to a group of biologists and scientists up in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem about putting on a biomimicry workshop where we actually look at the adaptation strategies that organisms use to adapt to the seasonal changes in climate, and seeing if those strategies can help expand our brainstorming efforts in our own adaptation strategies. So I think the climate change issue certainly can be, we can mitigate the effects by designing within the operating conditions of the planet and using biomimicry ideas. And we can also scour nature for the adaptation strategies to help us better adapt to changes in climate.
Great. Another couple of questions. What does biomimicry say about how to recover from our great dependence on non-natural technologies like water, wastewater treatment systems that lets us have a huge human population density? So did you understand that?
I think I did, and you can, the person who asked the question can reframe it if I don't answer it correctly.
Okay.
But if we really look to nature, I mean, are we doing things that no other organisms on the planet do? When we really look at where we've placed our large centers of population, it's very unlike how nature does it. We've placed large areas of population in areas that have no water. Arizona, Colorado's a good example, whereas ecosystems like Michigan is economically depressed. People aren't living there. And so what we've done as humans is we've transported that water to where we want it, and along the way caused a lot of problems. Many of you may be familiar with a book called 1491, and it's a historical novel with information about how this continent looked before Columbus discovered the continent. And the native people certainly did manage and change some of the aspects of our ecosystems in order to adapt them to their needs for farming and water distribution. But again, they did it within the context of the operating principles of the planet. So we can change how we deliver services and how we receive these water or energy or other services that we need to service large populations. But if we do it in a way that harmonizes with the operating conditions of the planet, instead of we try to overcome them. And what we lose is we lose resiliency. And in the face of the changing climate and the change of a lot of things in our society, that is really going to hurt us in the long run. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. Well, that was, okay, hold on. There's one more person with their hand raised, and unfortunately we're all muted, the audience is. So if you do have a question, just type it in real quick, and I'll get it to Marie. I think that I think that was the last of our questions for now. And again, I think Marie, is your contact information on the slide? I didn't notice if it
No,
was.
no, it was not.
Okay.
People
Well,
can contact me at. You'll go ahead and put it up on the web page, and it's on the report for the Great Sand Dunes workshop.
Okay. So,
So
yeah. If anybody has
one
any
thing.
questions for Marie, go ahead.
Oh, and one other thing is that RegionAid is interested in hosting several biomimicry workshops in 2011, and we've already had some inquiries and committed to a few workshops. So if your organization is interested in having a biomimicry workshop, some of the criteria is you need to have specific challenges in your ecosystem that you want to solve, and you need to have access to some local scientists or biologists who understand the organisms that live in that ecosystem. But contact me. We're able to provide a limited number of biomimicry workshops. They have to be a minimum of 3 days long in order to go through all of the methodology materials. But you can contact me, and we can discuss it further.
Great. And an example of a workshop like that was what you went through in the Great Sand Dunes, right, Marie?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, we'll just, again, you can access the information on peakstoprairies.org, and thank you, Marie, so much for sharing your information.
Well, thanks you for the opportunity.
Okay.